If you're a counseling educator in Australia, you know, deep down, you're not just teaching a subject, you're shaping an entire profession. But what are the real, on the ground challenges and core values that define your work today? Well, a recent study sat down with your peers to find out, and the conversation they had, it gets to the very heart of what it means to train the next generation of counselors.
And this quote from one of your colleagues, it just cuts right through all the noise, doesn't it? It's such a powerful reminder that what we're doing isn't just about teaching techniques. No, it's about guiding students through that really deep personal work that becomes the absolute foundation of their practice.
So, where are all these insights coming from? Well, the source is a qualitative study that basically captured a really candid conversation. We're talking about 8 highly experienced Australian educators. These are seasoned voices from your world, exploring the very same challenges and triumphs that probably define your day-to-day work. Okay, so here's how we're going to walk through this. We'll start with the heart of the matter, the core mission. Then we'll get into the tricky stuff, the quality conundrum, and the threats and tensions that challenge that mission. From there, we'll zoom out to the bigger picture of defining our profession, before wrapping up with a look at forging a path forward.
So let's dive right in at the very beginning, the why. Forget the curriculum for a second. What's the fundamental mission that really drives what you do as a counseling educator? Let's take a look at what your peers had to say.
First off, it's really important to know who we're hearing from. The 8 educators interviewed for this study, they are not new to the field, not at all. The vast majority hold doctorates, all of them have master's degrees, and most are bringing more than a decade of practice to the table. These are deeply experienced voices from right within your own ranks. And it's fascinating. Across the board, all 8 educators came back to this one central idea, the person of the therapist. The thinking here is that truly effective training isn't just about what a counselor does, but who they fundamentally are. It's all about cultivating that self-awareness, committing to personal growth, and really embodying the virtues that build a genuine therapeutic relationship. And these are the core values that just flow directly from that focus. Your peers are really emphasizing this need to instill a commitment to lifelong reflective practice, to embody virtues like integrity and compassion, and this is key, to maintain a practice that always puts the client's dignity and empowerment first. It's a vision of counseling that is just so deeply human-centered. But of course, trying to uphold that amazing mission doesn't happen in a bubble, does it? The second big theme that came up was what we're calling the quality conundrum, these systemic gaps and pressures that can make it really hard to maintain the very standards you're aiming for. Wow, that is such a stark statement. One of the huge concerns that was raised was the profession's academic standing. Some educators feel it's being undermined by a lack of a strong research culture, especially when you put it side by side with professions like psychology. And this single number, it adds some serious weight to that concern. 46%. A review found that only 46% of accredited counseling courses in Australia had any named research methodology subjects. The real worry here is that a shrinking research culture could seriously impact the profession's long-term development and its credibility. Okay, so beyond the curriculum itself, you've got these direct, external pressures you face every single day. And that brings us to our third major theme, the institutional squeeze. This quote just perfectly captures a deep frustration that was voiced in the study. There's this feeling of a real conflict between the core values of counseling, things like personal development and ethical practice, and the business models of some educational institutions, which, let's be honest, might prioritize enrollment numbers and treating students like consumers. And your peers got really specific about what this pressure actually looks like. We're talking about being pushed to lower academic entry requirements, feeling that pressure to pass students who might not be ready, and having core requirements like attendance completely undermined. It's this big shift towards a student as consumer model, all while feeling like you have zero institutional protection when you're just trying to uphold professional standards. And this all leads to a massive, fundamental question. You, as educators, you're seen as the gatekeepers of the profession. But what happens when institutional pressures are actively working against that very role? It creates this incredible tension. So who then is truly responsible for making sure only suitable practitioners get through? Which brings us directly into the wider conversation about professional identity. How do we defend counseling for ourselves? And just as importantly, how is it being perceived by everyone else? This slide does a great job of showing how your peers define the profession's unique space. They see counseling as fundamentally relational, it's transformational, and that's a really stark contrast to what they see as psychology's more diagnostic kind of medical model. The goal is client empowerment, it's facilitation, it's not diagnosis or case management.
But, and this is the tough part, despite that clear internal identity, there's this painful external reality. This quote really captures a feeling that came up in this study, a sense that counseling is struggling with a credibility gap, and it's often seen as having a lower status than other similar professions.
So, what's actually driving that credibility gap? Well, the educators pointed to a few key barriers: a fractured professional landscape with two competing peak bodies, this nagging concern about insufficient regulation, and, interestingly, a fear that chasing government recognition like Medicare inclusion could actually force the profession to abandon its core, person-centered values. So, okay, given all these deep and pretty complex challenges, where on earth do we go from here? The good news is the study doesn't just list the problems. Your peers also proposed a pretty concrete path forward. Let's dig into their recommendations. So 3 key recommendations really stood out as a strategy. First, reinforce the gatekeeping process after graduation, maybe with something like a national exam, to shift some of that responsibility away from conflicted institutions. Second, empower faculty and students by creating protected, anonymous channels to report when standards are being violated. And third, bake this accountability directly into the professional codes of ethics, making it a duty to report institutional malpractice. So, if you boil it all down, this is where we land. The research basically confirms a reality that many of you are probably living every single day. There is a fundamental, unavoidable tension between your deep commitment to the values of this profession and the very real pressures coming from the institutions and the market you work in. And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. The system says that educational institutions are the primary gatekeepers. But as your peers in this study have made crystal clear, those institutions are facing some pretty significant conflicts of interest. So the real question for all of us to consider is, who truly holds the key to the future of the profession?